Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hope Discovered podcast by CommQuest. My name is Bill. If you are new to the program, what we try to do here is provide a message of hope. And this is often centered in the message that recovery is possible, whether it's mental health, addiction recovery, and various number of other things. There's hope and recovery is possible. Our topic today is going to be the Family Education and Support Group. Family members of people suffering from addiction can struggle with lives full of chaos and turmoil, and often experience a complicated mix of feelings, including guilt, grief, confusion, anger, frustration, and hopelessness. And we certainly don't want that. The Family Education and Support Group can help you understand these feelings and provide you with loving support. Meetings are free and open to the public. Your loved one does not need to be a CommQuest client or in treatment. These groups are in an open discussion format and no appointment is needed. These meetings happen at Market Avenue Outpatient. This is of CommQuest, of course, 1341 Market Avenue North, and we'll be talking about the location throughout our podcast today. The meetings happen Tuesdays from 5:30 until 7 p.m. Simply walk in, check in at the front desk for directions to the meeting room. With us today, we have two guests who are key members of this group in terms of facilitating it. The first one is Kara Vogt. Kara, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Bill.
And also Gil Goodwin. How are you, Gil?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Bill.
Awesome. Kara is the co-founder of the Father's Motorcycle Poker Run. She is a 7-year member of the Stark County Opiate Task Force, a volunteer, and a parent of a person in recovery. Gil is a chaplain and a pastor and a member of the staff here at CommQuest. Let's talk a little bit about the group and how you got involved in it. Let's start with Gil. How did you get involved with this group?
I was asked several years ago to help facilitate it. There was a need at the time. I was working closely with a counselor that was leading the group, and schedules changed. And since it's something that I have a heart and a passion for, I think it was a good fit, and started to help and volunteer with the group.
Awesome. Kara?
I came into the group in 2014. At that time, my loved one was actively in addiction, and we had actually called CommQuest to get some information about services for him, and we were told about the family education group. And my husband got caught on that word education and missed the support group part, so he decided it was a good idea to go there. Had he heard support group, he might not have gone.
Right.
But we made our way into that first meeting, and it was exactly what I needed, and I've been coming back ever since. And now I come back because I like to be able to share what I have learned from the group and the peace that I have found in my life.
Right.
Through the group with other people.
That is fantastic. Let's stay with that. In some general terms, how does having a family member struggling from addiction impact a person?
I think it impacts a person in just about every way it is possible to impact a person. Emotionally, physically. You touched on a lot of the feelings there in your introduction, but it, especially in my case, dealing with an adult child, it just infiltrates every single aspect of your life. When I was at home, I wanted to be somewhere else because I had to deal with the chaos and the drama and the heartbreak that was going on there. And then when I was somewhere else, all I could think about was what was going on at home in my absence, or what was going to be going on at home when I got there at the end of the day. The other relationships in the family were suffering as a result. Not only were we at odds with our child, we were at odds with each other. We were arguing all the time. It was just it was almost a war zone.
Sure.
In my house at that point.
Gil.
I would totally agree with everything that Kara said. Unfortunately, I think it's an emotional roller coaster for so many people, and the feelings and the emotions they go through, anywhere from feeling guilty, stressed, anxiety, frustrated, anger, and probably two of the biggest emotions that I think so many family members experience is just a sense of hopelessness and a sense of helplessness.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about the 3 C's. All right. And they are, in very simple terms, you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. I'll stay with you, Gil, on this.
Yeah, I think especially for family members, I think it's a hard concept to grasp because I think a lot of times we feel like maybe we did cause it as a parent. We weren't, we didn't measure up, and we weren't the parents that we wanted to be, and that we can control it. There's things that we can say or do that'll help control it, and through that, maybe we can be a part of curing it. And it's just not the case. Unfortunately, it's not. And as someone that's in recovery and have lost family members, unfortunately, from alcohol and drug addiction, the one thing that I've really learned to live by, and it can be very difficult, is the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And this support group and other groups like it, I think, really help people have an understanding of that.
Yes. Kara.
It sounds so simple when you list those 3 sentences, but it's not.
Right.
It's everything we do is so colored by our personal emotions, and at the root of all of it is fear. The fear that we're going to lose the person that we love.
Right.
And I remember when we first found out about our child's addiction, the first thing my husband said to me was, "It's not your fault," because he knows my mind, because that was the first place I went. Sure. What did I do wrong? So he told me, "It's not your fault." He said, "It's my fault." And I'm like, "No, it's not your fault either." I'm like, it can't be. If it's not my fault, it's not your fault. And although you understand that intellectually, you don't feel it, especially coming from the standpoint of a parent. That's your job, to mold this person. So if the person didn't fit the mold, maybe you didn't do your job right. Of course, that's not true. I know now that is not true. I both know it intellectually and emotionally that is not true. But if you caused it, then there's a chance that perhaps you also can cure it. Correct. And that, I think, is the other thing we really want to know, that there is something we did that we can go back and undo or make amends for, and that's going to cure the problem.
Sure.
And part of the misunderstanding for me, I guess, was in not understanding that it really truly is a physical disease. Mm-hmm. I had heard that expression, over and over again. Oh, addiction's a disease, addiction's a disease. I did not understand what it meant. I just kind of thought, well, because it's something you have to grapple with lifelong. That's why we call it a disease. I really didn't understand that there were actual physical changes going on in my child's brain that were causing him to do a lot of the things that he does when he's using drugs. And of course, understanding that is something that I got also from the Family Support and Education Group, and that made a huge difference. And of course, we also spend a lot of time trying to control this thing because we're trying to prevent death.
Sure.
Bottom line, if I can control it, I can keep this person alive.
Right.
Yeah, again, well said, Kara. I agree. Until I got involved with CommQuest, with this group, I didn't totally grasp the idea that addiction was a disease. And we're fortunate. I know at CommQuest and other behavioral health organizations that have some incredible counselors that understand the effects of the brain. But I'm not going to get into all that, but that it is a disease. And when so many family members don't understand that. They think it's poor choices, bad decisions. They can't grasp the fact that it is actually a disease. And once you grasp that and you understand understand it, then I think it does help you to let go of some of the things that go on and what happens in the addict's life and stuff like that, and that you don't have the ability to control it or to cure it.
Gil, I know you've talked to a lot of people concerning these matters. Aside from the imposed guilt that people put on themselves, which is pretty natural for most people, what is the hardest thing about a family member to accept?
That's a really good question. I think it's going to depend on the family member. I think each family member is going to deal with it differently. I think it's going to depend also on the loved one that's in your life, the addiction that they're struggling with, because we're all wired differently. I would say for myself, family members, friends, wonderful clients at CommQuest that I've dealt with, I would say the hardest thing for me and the majority of the people that I would say I've been around would be the control thing. It's, we think that if there's something we say or do, and there are things that we can do to make a difference, but I think control is difficult. I know for me, that's something I want to control. I want to be able to control the situation, and I can't. I have to let go. And then again, I go back to the serenity prayer that really speaks into my life. And I love what Kara said. It's easy to say it, but sometimes it's very, very difficult to live it. I've always said for myself personally, I believe God's granted me the courage, but I'm not so sure I'm real good when it comes to the serenity and the wisdom part. So
yes.
I would agree with what Gil says, just what I have seen through the years in the group. The control is the hardest thing to let go of. I was able to accept that I couldn't cause it. And once I understood that it really was a physical disease, I was able to understand that I couldn't cure it. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical person. Therefore, I cannot cure a disease. Mm-hmm. But I still felt like I should be able, if I just controlled his behavior. Mm-hmm. In other words, if I just told him where to go and when to go there and what to do when he got there, he'd learn the steps. And then the other side of control is I also thought then he should just be able to control himself, his quote unquote behavior, because again, before education, we're thinking this is behavioral and not an actual physical disease process. Yeah. And so control trips us up on both ends of the spectrum, both in our own behavior and in the behavior that we expect the addicted person to be able to do. And we're pretty much wrong on both counts. Yes.
I'm going to stay with you on this next point because, having a family member involved, we often talk about on this program stigma. A lot of times stigma can prevent someone who is suffering from addiction from seeking help because they're afraid they're going to be judged or, it's going to cause them problems at work or what have you. When it's a family member, do you feel it? Do you feel, for example, the community saying, well, their son was in a lot of trouble? Do you feel that stigma and how people sometimes can judge you when you have that problem in your family?
I have been very fortunate in my personal experience. I have not really experienced stigma from other people. I was very lucky that I had family members who were very supportive from the beginning. I had a good group of coworkers with whom I'd been friends for many, many years, who knew, they had known my son since he was 3 years old. So they knew what kind of family we are, what kind of a parent I were, and nobody judged me. Mm-hmm. I judged myself more than other people did. And of course, once we started the Father's Motorcycle Poker Run, we're pretty much standing out in parking lots all over the county with this big sign over our heads that says, ask me about my experiences with heroin addiction. So we really owned it. I personally owned it. Once I really got it in my head that this was not my fault, I was able to own it. My husband, for a long time, he was kind of ashamed and also still thinking that it was his fault. And of course, when we started having these conversations with people about 2015, it was whispers. People would see the sign about the motorcycle run, and they'd come up and they kind of pull you aside and whisper in your ear, yeah, that's in my family too. And then once you start to talk to them and say, yes, me too, I know what you're going through, and the floodgates just open. Yes. But it did prevent us from seeking support for a while. The other part of that was not so much being ashamed of what was going on in my family, but just being ashamed that I was not strong enough to handle it on my own. And I wasn't. I was a mess. I was falling apart. And then it also, again, because I didn't really understand the disease of addiction, I was also kind of stigmatizing our own family by looking at my son, and I'm thinking, he's a really smart kid. This can't be what I see in other people. Like, he's too smart for this. My son is not going to be one of those people standing on the corner with a cardboard sign. And then one day I found the cardboard sign in his room. So I had to face the fact that I was actually kind of stigmatizing other people's situations in comparison to mine. So again, a two-way street on the stigma issue, I think, as much as with the control issue.
Sure. Gil, I was going to say you most certainly have talked to a lot of people, and I for one, I've known a number of people who've had children, family members, and they almost want to hang their head when they go to work, having this going on in their family. Well, how would you address that?
I think, and again, excellent question, Bill. I think, and Kara, again, I think really nailed it. Although there's a stigma associated with addiction, whether it be drug or alcohol, I don't think it's nearly as extensive as it was maybe even 5 or 6 years ago. There's very few people that I can even think of that I've talked to that have not been touched by this one way or the other. Most all of us have someone that we know, either a family member, a friend, a church member, a coworker that has been affected by this. And I think the more we talk about it, the more we share and we open up and we have podcasts like this, I think it's going to make a huge difference. Again, just from a personal standpoint, I remember years ago when I started preaching on my own addictions. It was amazing. I think Kara touched on it. It's amazing how many people then would open up and come to me and talk about this, their own personal problem, their family member and stuff like that. And I think the more we talk about it, the more podcasts and things that we do like this, the awareness is greater now than ever. I believe that. And because of that, and everybody's been touched by this epidemic, which I believe it is, I think the stigma starts to diminish.
Sure. And that's a great message. I feel that it has improved. There's no reason, for example, if your family member breaks an arm, that you would want to hang your head when you go to get help. And there's absolutely no reason when there's a mental health issue or an addiction issue. These are things that can happen much more easily than what a lot of people anticipated in years past. It doesn't take much for those triggers to get pulled. There's 3 important things to remember. And one of them is addiction is a disease. Addiction is a family disease, and addiction is a chronic disease. I'll start with Kara on this. You touched on it just a little bit before, but to summarize, addiction is a disease.
Addiction is a chronic physical disease. And one of the things, even before I had the science of the disease, I was still going to Tuesday group every week, and though the drugs of choice are different for different situations, the affected family member is different in different situations. We're all telling the same basic stories about what we're seeing in our homes: the lying, the stealing, the stories that don't make sense, the negative behaviors that persist in spite of these horrific negative consequences that the addicted person comes up against, the same physical and emotional impact on the family members. We're all dealing with stress and anxiety and depression and grief. And so all of these things run the gamut no matter what. And to me, if you tell me you have a runny nose and a cough, my first thought is you must have, well, it used to be my first thought used to be you must have a cold. If you come to me and you tell me that you think your child is using drugs and you're seeing, your possessions are disappearing and money's leaving your wallet and all of these strange people are coming to your house at all hours of the night, I'm going to say, you know what? Those sound to me like symptoms of a disease process.
Sure. Gil, I'm going to go to you on addiction as a family disease. And of course, we've touched on that. But to get into it more specifically, the best way that when I was researching this podcast, one of the things that came up to me to equate this to is being a caregiver. I don't know if a lot of our audience members have necessarily had a chronic illness in their family, someone who needs 24-hour attention, but it can really, the stress of that can really impact you. And in a lot of cases, parents have their children get to a certain age where they feel that they don't need to watch them 24 hours a day anymore. They feel that the day is going to come when their children are going to take care of them. Now, all of a sudden, they are in the role of a caregiver again. And that has to be very, very hard to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think it's so important. We were actually talking about it in our group last night, is I think that's one reason why self-care is so important. I mean, you have to take care of yourself. You have to do things physically, emotionally, and spiritually so you can be there for that loved one. But again, there's only so much you can do, and it can exhaust you. It can actually just drain so much energy out of you when you're all of a sudden you are what you feel to be maybe the caregiver for this person. And I think self-care is just so important to be able to take care of yourself on all three of those levels. And I think that's why it's so important to be involved in a group like this. And I know we're going to touch on that, but we all need a loving, supportive group that can help us deal with the person that we love that's struggling with addiction, and help us, to set those boundaries and not enable them, but still be there and meet them and love them at their point of need.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If I could follow up on that. Somebody once told me in relation to self-care as a family member, it's like being on when you're on the airplane and it's in trouble and they drop the oxygen masks, they always tell you, put yours on first before you help the person beside you. Because if you're passed out, you're no good to anyone else. And that feels wrong sometimes. Like your instinct is, I need to help the other person first and put myself on the back burner because they're in bigger trouble. But if you're going down, then it's just a matter of you're both going down. Nobody is surviving.
Absolutely. And that's such an important message for any caregiver. I've known a lot of people who have dealt with people who are dying of cancer, and they want to feel like, well, I got to be there for them, all the time. And they don't realize I have to step back and take care of myself. And that is true with addiction, mental illness. These other things can be very frustrating. And there comes a time when you have to take a step back and take care of yourself. So that's an absolutely very important message. I want to stay with you on this, Kara. Addiction is a chronic disease, and I feel what I hear when I hear that is that there is no magic pill. It's not something that in 5 minutes you're going to go to a counseling session and you're going to be okay. It's something that you have to commit to and be aware that it could be a long ride. Is that correct?
Exactly. And that was one of the things, again, where I sort of stigmatized my own family in the beginning by thinking, we're not like these other people that go through this and their loved one goes to rehab over and over and over again and, quote, just doesn't get it. When these stupid words actually came out of my mouth after my son completed his first stint at rehab, I looked at my husband and I went, well, thank God that's over. It wasn't over. That was the first of many, many ups and downs and trips to various facilities. It's something that my son will have to deal with for the rest of his life. And it's something that my family will have to perhaps not deal with actively in the sense of the crazy place we were when this all started, but it's still something that I have to be aware of. I have to always keep in mind, what are the signs? What are the symptoms I need to look for? And how am I going to have to adjust my boundaries, my self-care, my family relationships in relation to where he is with the progression or remission of his disease at any given point in time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Just to add to that, I think I've touched on it. I've been in recovery over 37 years now. And one of the things I relay to the people that I go see, whether it's at Wilson Hall or Deliverance House or at the Detox Center, is this is a lifelong process and journey. And there's a scripture verse that I really like that I live by, and I share it openly. It's 1 Corinthians. It's the 10th chapter, and it's the 12th verse. It says, if you think you're standing firm, be careful you don't fall. I've got a program that I follow every single day, and I share that with the people that I talk to, that I think we have to have a plan and a program that we're going to follow through every single day so that we can enjoy, living a sober life.
Yes.
And I think the other thing, I don't know if we've touched on it, the one thing we talked about addiction being a chronic disease, which it is, but the one thing that I think gives all of us hope is it's a curable disease. We actually have two of our family members that come to our group now on Tuesday nights. Between these two family members, I think each one of them have a loved one that both have almost 2 years of sobriety now. And I think that gives us all a lot of hope.
That was going to be my follow-up question. In this, I'll say world, it's a worldwide problem, but here in Ohio, the opiate epidemic and other types of things going on have been a chronic problem. We hear all the time about the rates of overdoses and things like that. So what would be your message of hope to the community in terms of where we're going with this?
Well, I think one, there's just, Bill, there's so much more awareness now than ever before. There's so many resources. One, for the family member that is addicted. There's recovery housing. There's intensive outpatient. There's medicated assisted recovery. There's a lot of behavioral health organizations that are doing a wonderful job. So I think there's a lot of resources and a lot of help. And for the family member, there's a lot of resources for the family members. Not only our group that I think's wonderful, but there's Al-Anon. There's a program called Celebrate Recovery. And so there's a lot of resources for hope and help if somebody wants to access it.
No, and I just want to add to that, too. There are different ways to access those resources. Gil specifically mentioned Al-Anon, and there are places that have virtual options for the family support program. So even if you don't necessarily feel comfortable walking into a room full of strangers, there are other ways you can kind of get your feet wet and get that process started without necessarily leaving your house.
Sure. That's great information. That was going to be my next question. So you covered that.
I always want to plug StarkHeroinEpidemic.org. That's the public service resource addiction website, which is co-funded by CommQuest Services and the Father's Motorcycle Poker Run. We've had that site up and running since 2016. It is a complete resource guide for both addiction recovery and family support and social support in Stark County. So again, StarkHeroinEpidemic.org. It has services specifically for veterans in recovery. It has family support. It has links to educational articles. It has where to get Narcan kits, where to find treatment. And then we also have support services for people in recovery who may need access to low-cost medical or dental care, pregnancy support, what we call common goods, which is food, clothing, and housing needs, job training and mentoring programs, and recovery support groups such as AA, NA, CA, all of the A's in the 12-step program. So all of that information is in one spot.
As I mentioned at the top of the podcast, the group meets at Market Avenue Outpatient, which is at 1341 Market Avenue North in Canton, Ohio. The times are Tuesday from 5:30 p.m. until 7 p.m. Kara, what's it like to walk in there for the first time?
It was nerve-wracking and it was a little scary, but I was in such a mess, I needed to do something. And I walked into CommQuest and I went to the front desk, and the very nice lady said, walked me upstairs and pretty much parked me in the room. And I was greeted very warmly by the people who were there, and everybody who walked in did not look at me like I had bad mother horns growing out of my head. Instead, they welcomed me, introduced themselves, started to ask me even a little bit about why I was there before the meeting actually started. Typically, what we do when we have a new member is the old members will introduce ourselves. We'll tell them a little bit about our story and what we've gotten out of the group. And then we just give the new person a chance to, if they choose to, either just to listen for that first time or to tell us about their story. Usually what happens is they start out a little reluctant. And once they start to spill it, they spill it all. Like I literally sat and probably cried for half an hour and spilled every stupid thing that I'd been going through and doing and feeling for about half an hour, and they just let me do it.
Yeah, I'll follow up with you on Gil on that. My guess is walking in there is just like anything else. It's the first time taking that jump, and then afterwards you might say to yourself, "Why did I wait so long to do this?"
Absolutely. So many people that need to be in a group like this don't come because of nerves, everything, the emotions they're going through. But when they walk down that hallway and they walk into the room, almost immediately, I've seen it time and time again since I've been associated with this group, their defense mechanisms come down. They realize they're in a room with other people that truly empathize with their situation. They feel loved. They don't feel judged. They're received with open arms. And they probably realize in most cases, I should have done this a long time ago. And that's why we're here today, to really promote the group, because the alcohol and drug epidemic is extensive. Mm-hmm. And the family members that are affected by it are extensive. And they need to be a part of a group, but they need to be a part of a group where they really feel they belong, they're loved, and they're going to get the tools and the help that they need. And I guarantee you, this group of people that meet at this group, and I'm speaking on behalf of them, I was touched by it when I got involved and got to be a part of it, because it's helped me in a lot of areas. And there's nothing like being around a group of people who have walked in your shoes and really understand what you're going through.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to just add one more thing. That first meeting, I didn't come away with all the answers. I didn't come away with a solution to the problem or anywhere near all of the tools I was going to need. But I came away feeling better immediately, feeling better and feeling more hopeful and feeling like there was going to be a way for me to negotiate it.
Sure. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's actually a gentleman that came last night that's been coming for a while, and he shared with it, he wasn't going to come, then he was going to come, then he wasn't going to come. But after he came, he shared that he needed to be here, and he was blessed by it. And
you can see it. You can see a visible lightening of the load.
Sure.
Right off the bat, just to relax the frown lines and a relaxation in the posture and just an opening up and a deep breath and a big pause, which is honestly what we all need first, is just an oasis and a pause from the chaos.
Sure.
One more thing I'd like to add about the family support group is that you do not have to be just a family member to attend. If you are also a person in recovery who has come from a family with addiction issues, or you still have perhaps people in your life who are close to you who are still actively using, this program can be beneficial in that circumstance as well. So it's not that we're all necessarily people with no history of substance abuse ourselves. So there's a broad range of applications for family support.
I'm sure the audience can hear the emotion in your voice, Kara, and that speaks to the impact that this group can have. Once again, we are talking about the Family Education and Support Group. If you would like to know more about all of the things that we do here at CommQuest, I would encourage you to go to CommQuest.org. Once again, that's CommQuest.org. Talking to Kara Vogt and Gil Goodwin today. Thank you both so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. You've been listening to the Hope Discovered podcast by CommQuest. Thank you very much for listening, and we will talk again.